Today we're talking about cold water bass fishing. My last video was can't miss winter baits. And if you haven't seen it, I'll put a link to it at the end. But in that video, I was talking about an upcoming trip that I was having. I was going back to Washington State, fishing the Northwest for big fish. And I did catch a nice smallmouth, 6-pound, 15-ounce right here. And I caught it on a blade bait, which is one of the baits that I mentioned in that video. And in this video now, we're gonna talk all about blade baits, my favorite blade baits, my setup, things that I've learned fishing blade baits, which I think is the best way to catch fish, especially smallmouth when the water is cold. And we're talking 40s, 30s. I mean, all the way as long as you can get out the boat on the water, you can catch them on a blade bait. But real quick, if you haven't subscribed, please do. If you like this content, I've really appreciated all the new subscribers. It's been growing slowly, but I'm getting back into the videos. So I appreciate that. So definitely subscribe if you like this sort of content. But now let's get into talking about blade baits. So today I posted a quick YouTube short with my 5 favorite blade baits. I use a lot of them. I've tried all different kinds of blade baits, and at first glance they kind of all look the same. It's a hunk of metal. It's really hard to do it wrong, honestly. I mean, everyone out there will do the same thing. It will vibrate, it will flash, it will catch fish when the water's cold. But my 5 favorite, we'll talk about in a minute, have little subtleties that are better for certain different conditions. I blade bait fished a lot. I actually did a video. It was 4 years ago. It was from one of my trips up to New York in the spring. It was all about blade baits. I'll put that video at the end as well. So I have thrown blade baits for several years. It is by far my favorite way to catch them when the water's cold. So we'll jump into my 5 favorite blade baits, and we'll talk about setups, things that I've learned, as far as, choosing the right rod, the right line, reel, all these sorts of things. We'll jump into all those things. So these are in no particular order. I'm going to run through them pretty quickly, and I'll talk about what I like about each of these blade baits. So the first one is the Depths Circuit Vibe. So this one is a little bit smaller profile blade bait, which I think is good at certain times. There's times when they want something big and flashy, and there's sometimes when they want something smaller. Now this one is a circuit, so it's got a circuit board on it instead of the metal. I mean, it's still a piece of lead, but it has a different vibration. It still vibrates a lot, but it feels a little bit different. So there's times when they want a different vibration. So I am always swapping out. And the good thing about these blade baits is they have that snap on them. So you can just take that snap off and put it on another bait. It's really easy to switch. Usually by the end of the day, I have a pile of 5 or 6 in my cup holder, just letting them dry out. I mean, I'm always trying different ones, different colors, sizes, and materials. But the Depth Circuit Vibe is a great one. Another one I really like is a little bit, it's similar to the Circuit Vibe. This is the Spro Tungsten Carbon Blade. Now, this is a tungsten version, like it says. What's different about this is it's more of a taller blade bait. These are both 1/2 ounce, but this one is a lot bigger profile. So it's still gonna have that same blade bait action, but it just gives them a different look. I've caught some nice fish on this Spro, including some 5-pound smallmouth on it, on this exact bait right here. So that's a very good one. Another one I like is the Jackall Keyburn. This one's pretty similar to the Depth Circuit Vibe, which I talked about. Really like this. We'll talk about hooks in a minute, but this one comes with a 2-hook system. Actually, all 3 of these do, and there's times when that's good and there's times when that's bad. And I'll get into that as well. Another one of my favorites is just kind of the basic Bass Pro Shops XPS blade, I believe it's called. And this one's different because the other 2 come equipped with the double hooks. This one has split rings and trebles. I like it because it has bigger trebles. It's good when fish are just kind of short striking. You tend to hook a lot more fish. The other one that I can't leave out is the one that I pour. This is from Do It Molds. It's very simple, really easy to pour. If you pour your own tackle, you can pour up a bunch of these in no time. So I like that because you're definitely gonna lose a lot of blade baits if you're banging them into rocks, fishing them, around cover. You're gonna lose them. So having a whole bunch of them, all you gotta do is get some of these blanks, pour a bunch of these, and get the hooks and the split rings and the snap. Super easy to do. I have piles and piles of these ready, made up. And I don't go too crazy. I have the brass and then the silver. I mean, that's really what I use for this particular blade bait. So with the hooks, so there's times when I like that treble hook. Like I said, I think it does hook them better. It's also gonna foul up more. So there's ways you can prevent that as well. The double hook that comes on a lot of them is cool because it slides on. There's no ring. It does hook them fairly well, but you're still going to miss fish just simply because you only have 2 points instead of 3. So I'm kind of torn on this. I've caught a lot of fish with these hooks. I haven't had any really issues with them bending out, but if I had the preference, I would rather have the treble hook. So I mentioned fouling. So that's a huge part of fishing a blade bait. So you're casting the blade bait out. Personally let it fall to the bottom, rip it up, let it fall, rip it up, let it fall. How hard you lift up and how quickly you do it and how often you do it is kind of up to interpretation. It's different all the time. You know, some days they want it hop really fast and really high off the bottom. Sometimes they want it just barely lifted off the bottom. Now with your 2D sonar or your forward-facing sonar, you can really get a good idea of just how far you're lifting that blade bait off the bottom. You know, you may think you're only just lifting it a little bit, but a lot of times looking at your sonar, that thing's coming up 4 or 5 feet, which I think is a little bit too much. Ideally, I like to have the bait come up about 1 foot to 2 feet off the bottom and then back down. It's kind of cool on your 2D too. You just see those little just lines. And it'll do that too on a forward facing. Of course, it's not going to have the line because it's live imaging, but it's cool to kind of get an idea of just how much you're lifting it with each motion of the rod. So talking about rods, in that old video from 4 years ago, I really talked about just starting using a little bit stiffer rod than I used to. I used to use just a drop shot rod, but I personally like something that has a little more backbone to it. You know, there's a lot of good ones out there. You know, Phoenix makes one. It's a 7.2 medium M1. I also have an old Shimano X-Age. I think this was called X-Age. And that one just had the perfect action for blade bait. So I use that one quite a bit still to this day. Even though it's a $100 rod from 10 years ago, it's still perfect for a blade bait. It's got a nice parabolic action to it. It's got some backbone to it, but still good sensitivity, you know, all those things. So generally something around 7 foot medium is gonna be great. I personally like spinning tackle. You know, that's another thing that is kind of unique. You know, it's kind of regional. You know, I've fished with some guys in different parts of the country that fish them all on bait casting gear. I personally like spinning for 2 reasons. One is generally it's going to be really, really cold when I'm fishing these baits. So you're dealing with ice, you're dealing with, you know, gloves, things like that. So it's a lot easier to manage spinning tackle than it is a bait caster. You can do it with both, but spinning, in my opinion, is the way to go. The other reason is getting the bait to fall. Simply, it's way easier to flip over your bail and let it sink than to thumb it down and try to keep that bait from causing a backlash. So spinning is definitely my way to go. You know, a standard 2500 or 3000 size reel. I personally like the Shimano Vanford. I've been using that a lot. I also have a couple other reels, but really that 2500 to 3000 size is perfect. One more really important key is the line, both your braided line and your fluorocarbon leader. I like to use high-vis braid on pretty much all my spinning setups, and especially for blade baits, because as you're lifting it up, so many times it's falling and you really don't have very good contact with the bait because it's on a slack line. You will see that line just real quick jump. That's when you have to lean into them. So a high-vis braid, I like 15-pound Seaguar Smackdown Flash Green. So that's really what I use for a lot of my spinning setups, you know, for drop shot and head rig, things like that. It's a good all-around size. The main difference is the leader size, you know, whereas those other techniques I'm using 8-pound, you know, maybe 10-pound. With a blade bait, I like a 10 at the minimum, but all the way up to 15-pound. So something really pretty thick for spinning tackle. But what that does is you're gonna foul less just simply because that line is stiffer. It's not as limp. So having a 15-pound, it's still gonna wrap around those treble hooks once in a while, but not nearly as much as if you're using an 8-pound. It's crazy how much of a difference it makes, but you will save yourself a lot of hassle. I mean, there's nothing worse than making a great cast with a blade bait, getting it out there, you start lifting it, and you don't feel the vibration because it's fouled up. That's something that happens regardless of the line you use, but going up in size will definitely help you reduce a lot of that. The other thing too is, this is so simple, but I've learned when you're casting, you have to be watching that bait. And this is something I do for everything, but you watch that bait as it's flying. You can see when that blade bait is flying and slicing through the air, you know, it's a good cast. you're not going to get fouled up very often. But if you see that bait twirling and doing all kinds of stuff, a lot of times that bait is already fouled in the air, and you might as well just try it real quick, see if it's vibrating. If not, crank that thing back in and go back out, because the whole key with these baits is vibrating, getting that action. So blade baits, like I said, I love them. I got boxes of them. I got a box that I take on the boat. I got tons more. They are awesome, great fish catchers. You know, they catch all kinds of fish too. I've caught lake trout, salmon, rainbow trout, largemouth, smallmouth, muskie, pike. I mean, you name it, walleye, perch. I mean, basically everything that's ever been in the lakes that or rivers that I'm fishing has fallen for a blade bait. They are great multi-species bait, great when it's cold. And these are my 5 favorites. I mean, there's a lot of different ones out there. Maybe I haven't tried them before. I mean, the one I almost included, but I just don't have as much experience with, is the Damiki Vault. I only have it in a really tiny one, so it's kind of limited. But really, for the most part, I'm using a 1/2 ounce blade bait. Once in a while 3/8, once in a while 5/8, but 1/2 ounce blade bait. You know, pretty simple colors most of the time. You know, something gold to imitate perch, something silver, white to imitate shad. I mean, there's a lot of, you can go as crazy as you want with colors like anything else, but most of the bites are going to be because of that action. And all these 5 blade baits have great action. And if you have that set up, you know, like I said, this is how I prefer to use it: a spinning rod, high vis braid, and a little heavier than normal fluorocarbon leader. You'll catch a lot of fish if you do that. Like I said, check out this video of my one from 4 years ago, and then this video I just did last week about fishing during the cold. Thanks for watching.